In this video, I'm going to show you how to make one of these little pin cushions. You could also alternate the base of it in order to create something else, like this little heart one that I haven't finished. So the steps I'm going to show you are the steps that I've posted online for how to do this. So just follow along if you need to watch the video, or you can just follow along on the instructions. So the first thing that you would need for this is some felt. And if you go to Dollarama, you can get this for $3. It's quite a bit of felt for that price. The other things that we're using are pins. So if you don't have any straight pins at home, you can also buy them at Dollarama. We are going to be using needles. I believe this set was from Dollarama as well. You can also look to see if your parents have any of these little kits from times where you might have stayed in a hotel and received that in the bathroom supplies. Or you can have needles themselves. So we're going to be using two sizes. One of the needle sizes we're using will be for regular thread, and the other one will be for embroidery floss. So what is embroidery floss? It comes like this. There are a couple companies that make it. It is a thicker piece of thread bound with, I don't know how many, 8 to 10, maybe even 12 pieces of thread wound together in order to create a stronger piece of thread. And we use it, you can use it to sew with, but it's more for embroidery, so for doing stitches and things like that. So I'm going to be demonstrating on this little hoop that'll tighten up my fabric. I will show you how to do it also if you don't have one of these, where we're going to just be doing it directly on the cloth. And here is another sample of a whole bunch of embroidery stitches that I'm going to teach you how to do. You're also going to learn how to put on a button. So if you ever have to make a repair, we're going to be putting on a ribbon. So I did get these ones from Dollarama. So you can go there and purchase those yourself if you want to do this on your own for fun. You can also go to a store like Fabricland and they sell ribbons. So this one here is one that might have been on a gift. I save all sorts of stuff, but it comes in different widths. So this is called satin ribbon. All right. Here's another one that I had made before, just as a sample of how to do things. So I'm going to put that stuff aside and get ready to start making stuff. Okay, so I also want to discuss another thing. In case someone in your house does sew, you might have a pair of really good sewing scissors. These are different than regular scissors. Regular scissors you might use at home to cut open a milk bag or cut paper, things like that. You don't ever want to use good sewing scissors for paper. It dulls them out and makes them not work very well on the fabric. Another type of scissors that you can use are called pinking shears. They have a zigzag on them and they will cut you a nice pattern. That is how I got this pattern on the fabric itself. Okay? So our next step is to get the fabric ready, or the felt. You could do this with other fabric. It's just this is really nice because it's so brightly colored, and I'm using intentionally contrasting colors to really pop it out. So I think for this one I'm going to be doing complementary pairs. I'm going to take one color of a turquoise blue and I'm going to take an orange. So this one has two kinds of green. It has pink and red, and you'd have to look at the different combos to see what goes best. We don't have any purple in this batch, but you can mix any two pairs. In the instructions, I've asked you to stick to complementary pairs just as another way of teaching that. So in the instructions, it says choose a set. Now you're going to cut or take one of the large ones and cut and fold it in half. So at this point now I'm going to be making the decision. What color is my object going to be? I want in the end for my object to be this color. So I'm going to fold it in half, and when you do that to a piece of felt, you'll be able to see where the line is. And then you can just slice it. Now one of the pieces is for the thing I'm making, the other side I'm just putting it aside. I don't need it. Then you're going to take about a quarter of one of these and you're going to make a patch to go on here. So it can be a heart, it can be anything you want it to be. I am going to use the pinking shears on it so it has a cooler edge to it. So whatever I make, it has to fit within this zone. So you can either just freehand it or you can slice it out. So I'm not sure what I'll do. Maybe I'll just make a square just to keep things simple. So it's not perfect. I'll just give it another slice here and here. So it's a bit longer. So this is my patch, and I'm going to attach it now. So I have to make a decision too. When I am putting this whole thing together, I'm going to be putting the ribbon on it. I can either leave the bottom as just a folded edge, or I can sew it over. In this case, I think I'll leave it just loose like that. But I did want to show you a few other steps in sewing that would be helpful later on. So right now I'm just going to pin this down. So when you use a straight pin, you are trying to go through both layers of the fabric. So I go down to the other side and make it parallel to the fabric itself and push back up, trying to keep your fingers out of the way so you don't get hurt. All right, so this is our first step. And now I'm ready to start sewing. So like I said, you can either sew with regular thread or you can sew with the embroidery floss. In the end, you don't really want the thread to show, so you want to try to use a color that's similar to this if you're going to do this first step. And I'm just going to read over a few things. So now I have the needles ready to go. If you have loose needles at home, this is one way to kind of settle it down to keep them safe so you don't get poked by them. And we just made these little flips, and then it would tuck into the little notch in here as a way of keeping it safe. So here's my needle. It's not super sharp, and felt actually has a lot of open space to it, so it's not that big of a deal that it's not super sharp. I'm going to choose a color to start with, and I want it to be a contrasting color. So I had already selected different colors here. So I'm just looking to see which is my best match. I think this one is. It's a little bit lighter, but it'll work. So my goal is I'm going to sew on this. So if you have difficulty with threading a needle, one of the things that we started to do in class was we used a wax candle, and we just rubbed the thread on the wax candle over and over again, and it made the pieces kind of stick together. So if you have difficulty with the threading, you could take a wax candle and hold the thread on it and pull. What this does, it is putting a layer of wax on the tip of it, and it's really connected now. It should be quite easy to put it together. There, slides right in. All right, so you have two choices when you're threading a needle. You can either take the two ends of it and attach them together. That's what I would do if I was using a regular piece of thread. Because this is embroidery floss and it's more expensive, I only want to use one line of it. So then I'm going to take this, do an overhand knot, and attach it near the bottom. Okay? We want this to be hidden underneath. So this is the front side. And I'm going to start here. This is called a straight stitch. I'm going from the back. If I yank really hard, I might be able to pull this the whole way through. Oh, it's staying, so that's good. Then I'm going back down through the other side. You don't want to have this thread be too long, or you might have trouble with it getting tangled as you're working. And I'm trying to keep my stitches equally away from each other and equally away from the edge. This is going to be decorative, and I want them also to be equally the same size. It is a decorative piece. And that's why I chose a color that would contrast really well against the fabric, because I want it to show. You wouldn't usually do this stitch if you want to hide something. Now, what I can do now is put a knot down. So when I do a knot, you want to make a loop and you will put your needle through there so that you are doing an overhand knot, but I'm doing it with my fingers and the needle. And I want the knot to be right against the fabric, so I'm just going to hold on to that knot part and slide, and that gets it really close to the fabric itself. And then I snip it. Now, if you're using these really sharp scissors, just be really careful, because if you catch your skin, it will hurt and you will cut yourself. Okay, my next step that I'm going to do is attach a button. And I had one here. It's just going to be a tiny little one for what I'm doing. I might turn it into a flower. And I have to make sure that as I make some decisions here now, that I know which is my up and which is my down. Okay? So if I make this into a flower, I might have it up here a little bit higher. If you want to just center it and have it be a design thing, just put it right in the middle. Now, I am going to use the same thread. This time, I'm going to double it up. So whenever you put a button on, if you use double or quadruple the amount of thread, you don't have to sew as much, because you're getting more on at a time. Okay, so here I'm doubling it up. Now I want it open still. I am going to make this into a flower. If you have a four-sided or a button with 4 holes in it, think about the design that's going to happen. If you have 4 and you crisscross it, the way that you align it, it's going to look like an X, or you can align it another way and it'll look like a plus sign. I like it to look like an X because it looks a little bit more randomy. Although when I put the button down like this, it looks like a square, which isn't as attractive, in my opinion. All right, so I got to get through to the other side, and I might have a problem with this needle being too big for that button, but no, I did not. Okay, so it's anchored, and you go back, crisscrossing, and then to another hole, and you're just kind of guessing. When you're trying to find the hole in the back, you're kind of just moving your needle around till you find it. Now, for the purpose of what we're doing today, just decoration, that's probably enough. Okay, so I am going to tie it off now. It's really important that I get really nice and tight on the knot. So again, I'm going to pinch. I'm pinching where I want the knot to go, so that when I slide it, it goes to where I'm telling it to go. And I might do it twice. I'm going to do, actually I think I've ended up knotting the 2 pieces together, which is good. Because we've had some problems in the past where students cut that thread too short and their button fell right off. Okay, so now that's on. Now it's not perfectly centered, but it's pretty close. All right, so the next thing that I would like you to do is think about the different patterns or different embroidery stitches you could put on. Now, I recommend watching some videos on how to do this. There are certain ones on here, like these are just straight stitches, like exactly what I did on the patch itself. This is called a French knot. This is a blanket stitch. Again, blanket stitch. These ones here are just X's, so it's called a cross stitch when it's like that. This one's kind of neat because it makes it look like leaves. This is a chain stitch. And this is a satin stitch where they're parallel to each other. Okay, so I am going to show how to do just some basic ones. So I need to get some other colors because I think I'm going to want green. So the first thing I'm going to do is just come from underneath the button a little bit. I'm going to make the stem of the flower. I want it to be hidden underneath. So I'm going to start my first stitch underneath, and then I'll come back down and anchor it. I'm going to anchor it on a bit of an angle. So this will be a bit of a diagonal line. So while I was doing the video, I lost connection or something, and you didn't get to see how I did the full sheath knot. So I'm going to repeat that step. And I'm having a little difficulty here. Okay, so I will show you on one of my demo hoops. So if you're into embroidery, if this is interesting you and you kind of like it, you can get these looms or, oops, from the craft store like Michael's. And it's just 2 loops and you squish them together, you put the fabric over top and it tightens everything up nicely. All right, so unfortunately, I lost my stitching. So in the example that I was showing you here, here's what it looks like in the end. I did 1 line up to represent the stem of the flower, and I made it kind of long, and when I started it, I had done it underneath the button itself so it didn't show. Okay, so now here's the sheath knot. Here's a completed one, but the way that it works is you're putting 3 parallel lines, 2 that are shorter and 1 that is longer. And you want them to be kind of equally distant on either side of that line if you're going to make a stem. And then you want the other one to be longer. And you want it to be parallel to the first one and equidistant again over that center line. And then I'm going back in again, doing the 3rd line, the same as the first one. You want them relatively close together.
Then the next step, this is the hard part, is understanding this. You're going to come up through about right here. You can pull your thread all the way through, and then you're going to weave your needle underneath the first 2. Don't go in the middle of the actual fiber or the actual thread itself. You're just sliding underneath both at the same time. Then you're going to go back in, and when you go back in this time, you're going to aim, I'm going to aim to hit it at about right here. But I'm going over and under the last one and back into the fabric and through to the other side. And when I do that, it's going to be capturing all 3 strings over that one. So I did it on here like the whiskers on
a cat. Okay? It can also make stars. As you can see, it kind of looks like a star here. And then I'm going to close that off. When I did it over here, I just went to the next flower. I knotted it, but then I went to the next flower each time. Okay, so the goal of this is to place your needle parallel against the surface, and you're going to wind your thread 3 times around the needle itself. You might want to use your finger to help hold the knots on. Sometimes they slide off. Then when you go back in, you don't want to go back in the same hole you came out of. And then you pull. And that creates a rosebud shape. So if I wanted to make a few more of those, I could really bulk it up. Once I start one, though, I'm going to have to do multiples because it won't look good to just have 2. 1, 2, 3 rounds and back in again. Now, felt itself is not a very strong material, so, be careful about yanking the threads too hard. So I'm going to start again. 1, 2, 3. Choose where I go back in again. Gently pull. So it's giving me a little cluster of rosebud flowers. I'll just stop there. And that's what I did before I realized that the camera wasn't working. So a chain stitch starts with you anchoring your thread on the opposite side, and you are constantly moving around kind of in a circular fashion. I'm going back in, anchoring, and coming back up the fabric. When I do that, I want to make sure that I'm linking the thread over top. Back in again and forward. I'm trying to keep consistent in how far I go, like how long each stitch is, because I want the chain to look consistent. Again, back in, anchoring just where I was, scooting forward, linking over top, and pulling through. Again, down, up, link.
Pull through. More, down, and up. Link. Earlier I went to fix something and I had it start to unravel on me. So you have to make sure you stop it at some point, or you have to stop it with a knot. So same here. Pull it straight thread forward, going down in, across now. Make sure it's parallel. Hook underneath, or link it. Pull.
Line. Okay, and then I'll flip it over and do my knot. So again, whenever I do a knot, I either put my finger in to the hole there, or I actually put the needle. All right, so that is how it looks until I get to the next stage. So the next thing I'm going to show you is how to thread a regular needle. So I have some different threads here. I am going to stitch from the back side, and when you stitch from the back side of something, you're doing it because you don't want the seam to show and you don't want your threads to show. So you should be using a color similar to it. So I just wanted to show you some other gadgets and some other tricks. We are going to be adding a ribbon onto this. We want the ribbon to be hidden underneath. So what I have decided to do, I'm changing the instructions a little bit here. My picture is on the inside. I have folded the fabric back, so I'm putting the right sides together. I want to have some fabric for my loop, and I want it to be long enough so that I could use it to hook on something. So I've guesstimated that it's about 6 inches. So I'm using the ruler, and instead of cutting it with straight scissors, I will cut it with the pinking shears. That makes it so that it stops unraveling. That's the neat thing about these kind of scissors. Then I'm going to take my ribbon and I'm going to put it inside the piece. And later on I'm going to flip it over and it will be right side up. So I'm going to anchor it or place it right here. In the end it's going to be sewn into place. So I'm going to have it come over here just a little bit, place the other piece on top, and then I am going to use 2 pins to anchor the ribbon in place so it doesn't move while I'm doing these other things. I'm also going to use 2 other straight pins to hold the fabric down in the exact spot that I want it to be in. And I'm going to do a stitch across the top here. I'm going to do what's called a back stitch. Okay, so I have my threads here. You can use either one. This is a more expensive one, so I'll lay that aside. I'll use this because I hardly have any left and I don't have enough thread to use it on my sewing machine, so it's a good one to use. So I want to have enough thread. I'm going to use a double length here. So I went a long stretch there. I want to show you a few different things that you can use. So I'm using a smaller needle this time because I'm using just regular thread. So I could just try to get it in, and I did first try. I got it in. Now if you have difficulty with that, you can use this. This is a needle threader, and it's a very thin wire, very, very thin piece of wire attached. Now you want to be gentle with these because they will break. So you push that through the eye of the needle, then you take your thread and you put it through that bigger eye that you've been given. This is a lot easier. Then you just slide your needle over top till you get to the spot, and it's done. This time, I'm going to pull till I have both ends together. This is a great way to first learn how to sew so you never lose your needle by accident. Okay, so I wanted to show you a trick that I do. I like to link my knot in. So my first stitch, oops. My knot is so tiny that it's popping through because I'm using felt. The needle is pulling it through. So instead of going and pulling tight, I'm going to go back in again, and I'm going to then, this time, I'm going to actually open up the 2 threads, and I'm going to put my needle through it. And by doing that, I am actually anchoring the knot so it can't slide all the way through. So now I'm going to do what's called a back stitch. It's called a back stitch because you're going to go forward and then you're going to go back. So I went forward, and then on the opposite side, I'm going back in again. So this is actually giving you a double line of defense on your seam because you're actually sewing it twice. So I went forward about a centimeter and back about a little less than a half a centimeter. It's harder to see because the color I'm using is almost the same color as the thread itself, or the fabric itself.
So you're constantly going forward and going back. So I'll just anchor it and I'll show you on that side. So on this side it looks like a straight stitch, and on this side it looks like a solid line. And then I might go back over this one a couple times because I'm on the ribbon itself. And I really want to make sure that it does not come out. And you want to keep these lines really aligned, because when you turn it over, if you have been all over the place, then you are going to see things. You will see the thread showing. Something went a little bit funky here, so whenever something goes funky, just try to go back to where it came from and see if you can solve the problem. So back stitch is something that you should use if you're trying to hem something. Or like make a repair or something on a piece of clothing that you have. And then I'm going to tie off. So if you notice on this side it just looks like straight stitch. On the other it's like a line. Okay, so I've got my knot. I need to take it exactly beside the fabric. And because I know that my other thread came out the first time around, I'm going to for sure do a few more knots here. Maybe do kind of like a French knot. Go to the other side. And pull. And maybe I'll repeat. I like doing it where I'm using both threads at the same time as opposed to separating them and tying them on their own. Oops. I'm going to undo the pins since everything's getting caught on them. And as I pulled it, my knot is there, but still a little awkward. So I'll go one more time.
I think I've done it enough times that it's actually on there pretty good. Okay, so now I've taken off all my pins and it's like a little cylinder now. And I'm going to flip it right side out. And as I turn it around, you can see that I have captured my ribbon nicely. It's anchored, it's already on. Okay, so the last step is going to be to close it up. Now I could have the blanket stitch go all the way around, and I think I might. In order to do that though, I'm going to again put the pins on. The pins help to anchor it so it doesn't keep moving on me. Things do shift a little bit when you're sewing. So maybe I'll start here though. I'm going to do the blanket stitch around here and then I will stuff it. So I already have a needle prepped and ready to go with orange thread this time because I want this to show. So when I go to do this, I don't want to go from here because my knot will show. So if I go to start, I'm going to come inside the piece itself. And I'm going to pull my thread this way. The knot is inside of the container or inside of the pillow and you won't see it at the end. So the blanket stitch is a kind of a neat stitch. It gives you, if you just do it as straight on a piece, it's going to give you this pattern, and when you're attaching a patch, it looks like that. And it's same look, like you're getting an outline plus you're getting these other ticks. And the goal is to keep your ticks the same size throughout. So here's another one. This one is not exactly the same width every time the stitch is happening. So that's something to keep in mind, and you want them, this side's better, they're more consistently the same width and the same depth as they go into the material. Sometimes it takes me a few minutes to remember how to do this. I gave myself a really long piece, so to make it shorter, I just pull and have a way longer end from the eye. So I just have to keep in mind that I only have so much space before I have to give it a tug again. So to do this method, what you're doing is you're going downward. It's hard to do on corners, I'll tell you that. You have to do a few little tricks. So I'm going in through the fabric. When you have a longer piece, make sure it doesn't get tangled on you. Now before it goes in, I have to hook inside, so it's kind of like the chain. So that's my first one. Then I'm going to go across and down, and as I go to pull it through, I hook it in. So that's giving me my horizontal and my verticals. So again, I'm going down. This time I have to be really careful to make sure I'm the same distance. This is what sets the pattern up. Across and through. So through to the other side. Don't go all the way, because you have to hook that part. Oops. Now I want that, I'm going to have that come across the front. And in. Now this one's trickier, because if I just pull, it's going to be around this ribbon, so I'm actually going to go through the center of the ribbon to catch that one. Otherwise it's going to mess up the pattern. Again, down, through to the other side, and before it goes away, you hook your needle in. Okay, so this is what I'm talking about, my thread. It's getting close. Okay, so down to set the pattern, pull, and through the loop. Every once in a while, take a look at it and make sure your pattern is forming nicely. Again, front. Once you get good at this, you can just hook it like that. Once you understand the pattern, you can start to foresee the action and set yourself up to capture the string properly. Oops, I did it opposite. What did I do? I captured it on the wrong side. So I'm supposed to be catching it from the back. Wait, is that right? Yes. So when you get to a corner, this is where you have to do a little bit of thinking. I might do one more stitch. So again, I'm always coming in from the front. I'm actually going to put 3 stitches through this one. So that's another straight one. Now I'm going to do a diagonal. So this is setting it up on the corner. Then I'm going to go in again from that spot and through. And this sets me up with a nice little corner doodad. I think I'm a little bit off here. Let me go back one. I think I'm going to anchor it with a little stitch up here. You do have to be careful though, because the felt is so thin, it's not strong, so just be cautious as you're doing this kind of thing. All right. There is a better way, I'm just not doing a very good job of this. So now I want to come back through here. I need this to be linked, otherwise I can't get to my next stitch properly. I don't really like the way that looks. Looks better on this side. Okay. Wait. There.
blanket is almost at the end here. So I'm going to yank to pull it out. Alright, let's see if I can get a nicer look to my corner here on this one. I need to go in here. This will set up the diagonal on the end. Come back in again. And through. This will give me my horizontal. Yeah, that's way better. And repeat along the bottom.
So you just need a little pile of stuff. I usually use white. So let me see if I have some of that. Like white stuffing like this. But I will use this. This was from some other kit that I had. And you just push it inside. Once it's inside, I then want to pin this again shut because it's going to want to keep coming open. So by pinning it, it's going to help me to keep pieces in place as I do the final stitching. Okay, so again, from the front. So I think you can do the blanket stitch either always from the front or always from the back. Either one, so long as you're consistent, it will work.
It's a really nice decorative stitch to do. And something's going to pop out on me, so just removing the pins out of the way. Make sure you keep that.
So now I have to finish this off. So I want to do a knot, but I don't want it to show. So and I need to do one more stitch here to finish this off. So I'm going to come around here and I'm going to go kind of through and under because I want to finish off the look that there's a horizontal going across. It's sort of there. Go back in one more time. So I'm going to try to knot and then I'm going to shove the knot inside and poke it in with my needle. So there's where the knot is. I want it as close as possible and I just push my needle against it and it makes it happen. One more round, there's one more knot. Put my needle in, pull, and it tightens. And there you have it. So now you have a little ornament or a pin cushion. So that's the nice thing. If you do more sewing, you can just put your pins on or your needles on and have them access. So just to show you the other ones that were made before, here is the opposite of that same one. So using the teal color or blue-green with orange. We have a pink with a lime green. We have lime green with pink. We have purple or yellow with purple and purple with yellow. And we also had the red, so here they are. Okay, we had red and green and red. So there's lots of options that come in that pack from Dollarama. So these three little characters and the stars were made by Fabric and Felt, which was a little booth set up at the One of a Kind show. She calls it Fabric and Felt at hotmail.com if you want to find out more information. Okay, so these are just super simple. They're simpler, made even probably easier than what I've just shown you there. This was made by a student in class, beautifully done with his blanket stitch here and his snowflakes. Another student figured out how to make a three-dimensional figure out of felt. And I have some other things that I have made and some that I have purchased that I can show you as well. So these things were bought from last year at IKEA. This has been glued on, but some of the stuff is sewn on. So mushroom and a little, this is not really the same technique. This I bought at Craft Ontario. It's a little igloo, and it was made from an artisan up in Baffin Island. So then I made this, has joy on one side with little beads that you can get from Dollarama, and the flip side I just did with a button, so it's an ornament that can hang. I've given you the instructions, I think, or at least the pattern in the class. This one here is the penguin on one side and owl on the other. Super simple stitches to do, but you did have to pay attention to all the layering to get everything to go right. And on this one here, it's a blue jay on one side and a cardinal on the other. So it kind of works multi-seasons. So those are the things that I have made.